Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank some people for making tonight possible. I would like to thank the CCAD administration for their support in this AFI series of speakers and visiting artists. I'd like to thank Joe Patrica of AFI, American Electric Power, especially Dale Haidloff for helping to underwrite the cost of the AFI Visiting Fellows. Thanks to Sean Dunn for promoting the event for all of these AFI events. And thanks to Palmer Pattison for his ongoing support of our efforts. Ron Sachs, the chair of Cinematic Arts, sends his apologies. He is off at an event tonight working to bring a big new project in for the next academic year. So I'd like to introduce our AFI fellow, Justin LaForge. His background as an editor and filmmaker whose works include music videos, short films, documentaries, and feature-length narratives. His AFI thesis film won both the Student Emmy and Student Academy Award that year, and was also an Academy Award Qualifier. Mr. LaForge currently teaches AVID certification courses at AFI. He advises post-production teams at AFI and teaches the aesthetics of film editing at Emerson College. So, welcome, Justin.
Hello, everyone. The Art of Editing, a Meditation on Failure. That is supposed to be a little bit of a joke, but it's also intended to get your mind around what it feels like to be an editor. Oftentimes, you will have failed a lot to get nowhere. And when you think of failure and progress, for example, Walter Murch, he calls them shadow cuts. Who here knows Walter Murch? All right, so those are probably people more interested in the editing discipline, but he's one of the editing giants in the world. Not many editors are known, but he's one of them. And shadow cuts to him relate to the idea that he has made thousands of, if not tens of thousands of cuts to get to a single cut. In Apocalypse Now, I think he said, if he had merely made one cut a day and added that up over the multiple years he worked, that would have finished his film. Meaning, in reality, he ended up cutting, for those 3 years, every day, 10 hours a day, with his assistants, grinding it out. And at some level, I mean, the failure leads to the end result. That is the process, is to make the mistakes and make adjustments. The other part is, as an editor, that's why it's a meditation, is that you, even when you're finished, you never know if it is good. You sometimes question that, and that's just part of it. The rest of the presentation is going to be me talking about my own failures, technical and creative, and sort of like what my path was to get to here. And it's also about me telling you the things I wish I had known, sitting where you are as an undergraduate student, and the things that were just out of reach, it always seemed. This is my family. It's my wife and my daughter, June. As he mentioned, I went to AFI. Before that, I studied math and graduated with a math degree and then decided to get into film. Those are naturally occurring events, I think. I assume that because you're here, you probably also have something wrong with you because you're interested in film and you are a glutton for punishment of some kind. And so, anyway, the path to getting into AFI and then working in the professional world is just a series of extended failures, and we'll address all of those, or some of them. You can't address all of them. So let's starting on the technology side. I'm going to go over some specifics and also some processes that will be retained even though the technology is evolving. There'll be some principles that you're going to want to keep even with the evolving technology. Maybe the processes will also yield new ways of thinking also. In terms of me talking about the creative process, all three of these are considered masterpieces, all three of those paintings, and all of them were derived through different processes. So for me to dictate to that process to you would be dishonest, and being that this is an art institute, you already know that. But the main thing about what I'm talking about when I am talking about the creative process is that you need to be aware of it, because it will affect you whether you want it to or not. Where you're spending your time and your energy in the process is going to affect the end result. And in a way, that's the whole making films is all about that process. Sorry, let's go back one. So in undergrad, and I talked to your professors about this, editors and editing classes, they often show a film called The Cutting Edge. How many people have seen The Cutting Edge? Yeah. And The Cutting Edge, at the end of watching it, you jump up and you say, yes, the power of editing. I'm going to be, this is where it's at. And that was my experience too. I was very excited about editing and the power of editing. It is very powerful. But it didn't properly gauge what your relationship is like in an everyday working world. And in terms of the people that they have on there, like Walter Murch, like Don Camburn, like Thelma Schoonmaker, those people are working with some of the pillars of cinema. So yes, they experience these, they lived kind of on a different planet when they're talking about it. And so instead of ever showing The Cutting Edge, not the movie about the ice skating, the editing one, this is kind of my anti-cutting edge, and it's a clip from a 1981 film called Modern Romance, starring Albert Brooks, and he plays an editor. This is it.
We may be trapped here, but we can do something about it. You're acting like little weasels. How did you ever make the fleet? I can communicate with the fleet central computer if I can figure out the code. We've got to have that information.
I believe I know the code, sir.
You know nothing. Now, I want you to spread out and search the ship. Go!
Okay, now, what did you do?
Remember when Kennedy went down the line and he was accusing everyone of having the code? He said, do you have it? Do you have it? Do you have it?
Yeah.
I cut that.
Great. That's a great cut. Okay, that's great. Now, there's something else here I think we can change.
Little weasels. How did you ever make the fleet? I can communicate with the fleet central computer if I can figure out the code. We've got to have that information.
I believe I know the code, sir.
You know nothing.
Okay. All right, this is great. The guy who says, I believe I know the code, there should be just a reaction shot of him where he's looking around. He's not saying anything. We got that, right?
Yeah, it's a trim.
Okay, get it. Oh,
Okay.
This is good. Get it.
We got it.
Okay.
Here you go.
Okay. This is going to be great. Here, hold this for a second. Now, here's what I feel, and I felt this for a long time, and it just hit me. I don't think there's any reason to have him say, I think I know the code, and then be told that he doesn't. Basically, we find out in another hour in the film that he does. Why tip it, okay? Now, what I want to do is, I'm going to take Kennedy's line out, you know nothing. Then I will put this reaction shot, put it in here, and I think we double our suspense. We'll get this guy looking around. Kennedy doesn't see him. The audience does. This has got to be good. This is going to be great. Okay. Okay, watch.
trapped here, but we can do something about it. You're acting like little weasels. How did you ever make the fleet? I can communicate with the fleet central computer if I can figure out the code. We've got to have that information. Now, I want you to spread out and search the ship.
All right.
Go!
Right. I'm telling you. All right. That's it. That's it.
Hello.
David.
Hey, look at this.
No. Listen to me.
What?
I think I got something that's going to make the whole last part of the picture work.
What?
Woke up at 5:30 this morning with it. Can you get 2 more hours of dubbing time for us tomorrow?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, really great. You know when Kennedy takes a communicator?
Yeah.
And he goes all the way down to level 4?
Wait, yes.
And he's running around the passageway?
Yes.
And he's coming right towards
Right,
camera?
right.
We've never had the appropriate footsteps.
What do you mean?
The footsteps we have in there are the real ones. I think they're muffled. I think we're on like a carpet that day, remember?
Yeah.
Okay, so we go in there tomorrow and we get the honk, honk, honk. We get, you know the kind of sound I'm talking about with the footsteps, like you can just hear almost a little echo on it. You get him breathing heavy, like he's going to have a heart attack. You feel his shoulder coming against the door. It'll get just what we've missed all along. We'll get that feeling.
You want to have footsteps?
No, I think he wants a whole feeling.
Yes. What do you think?
I don't think we need it. I think the footsteps we have are fine.
I'm talking about going in there and getting the pound, pound, pound and getting the metallic feeling and going around the corner. You're saying that's going to be as good as a man just walking on a carpet?
Uh-huh.
I thought you'd really go nuts over this.
Okay. Call Todd, see what we can get tomorrow, okay? Okay, good. All right,
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. Pound.
But I mean breathing too.
Yes, heavy breathing and pounding. Okay, good. Let me
But
show you.
that's why it hasn't been working.
Well, all right, we'll do it. We'll do it good. Let me show you this. You're going to love it, okay? Watch this.
You're clear on what I'm saying.
Yes, pound, breathing and walking.
And it'll make it better.
It'll be good. Okay, watch this, though. I'm real excited about this. You're going to love it.
What are we saying?
Secret code book, okay? I think it finally works.
We may be trapped here, but we can do something about it. You're acting like little weasels. How did you ever make the fleet? I can communicate with the fleet central computer if I can figure out the code. We've got to have that information. Now, I want you to spread out and search the ship. Go!
Machine's broken. Something's wrong with that. What'd you do exactly?
Well, first we cut Kennedy going down the line. Remember when he asked everybody if they have the code?
Yeah, that's good. But where's the guy who says he has the code?
Okay, watch. He's here.
The line I'm worried about. Kennedy's line following.
Well, wait. See? There's the guy. Now we just have a reaction shot. We've eliminated his line.
What about Kennedy's line?
What?
You know nothing.
Well, no, he can't say that now. The guy doesn't say anything.
I love that line.
No. Look.
I love that line.
I know, but look, I did a lot of...
I love that line.
I did a lot of thinking here. Listen, please, one second. We find out in an hour from now that these two people are the people involved, okay? That guy knows the code. Kennedy knows he has the code. Why introduce it now? Why not have a little mystery going?
It's not a mystery. It's a space picture.
Yes, I know, but it's just...
It's his character in there.
But I just think...
You know nothing.
No, I swear I think it's wrong this way. This way, the audience can see a little shot of this guy.
That little shot, too. Look at his eyes move. Ooh, something's going to happen here. I'm not crazy about that.
Well, but that's exactly what you want if something's going to happen here.
Not that way. I'd like to do a little subtler.
Well, I don't think we have any other takes on it.
No, so let's do it all the way out. Let's have him say, I think I have the code, and Kennedy says, you know nothing.
You're going to tip it. You're going to tip it.
Better that than to do this little mysterioso.
No, I totally disagree. Now, look, here's what I'm saying. I mean, if you're in a theater and you're watching, and the beginning of a movie happens, and a character right in the beginning of a movie says, I did it, and the guy in charge says, no, you didn't, well, they've already had that confrontation. Even though he says, no, you didn't, whatever that means, he's already met them. This way, there is no confrontation until an hour later, yet the audience sees it, and Kennedy doesn't. But that way, what? The audience will go, maybe, or maybe they'll know, maybe they won't know, but I think it works better.
You may be right, but let's do it the other way.
All right, we'll do it the other way.
Okay.
Okay, it's getting exciting.
Okay?
Tomorrow the footsteps?
Yes.
You'll do it?
Yes.
And you know what I mean?
Yes, pound.
You need me there?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
This is where it really gets exciting for me.
Okay. See you later.
Robert?
Yes?
Walk in my car, I just want to sure. Okay, let me just ask you. How do you like the movie?
What do you mean?
Is it good?
Well, I think it's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Well, I mean, maybe it's great. I just think it's too early to tell.
I like that ship.
The ship's good.
And that was the most important thing, I think, to make it into a personality, to have the ship almost like a character that you cared about.
Yes.
And if there are a couple of scenes that are no good, we'll always have the ship.
The ship's always there.
And you know how we always say in the bowels of the ship, we put everything in the bowels of the ship?
Yes.
We've heard it so many times.
Yes.
Last night, I'm watching Alien on cable.
Yes.
They say the monster's in the bowels.
Yeah.
Well, the same word. They use the same bowels.
Well, so what do you think? What are you afraid of?
I'm afraid people will think that
That we stole it?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Alien was years ago.
Well, but it was on TV.
I know, but every ship has bowels. That's the way they refer to ships.
Because I thought if we were worried about it, we could dub in basement instead of bowels.
Oh, no.
Basement.
Bowels is great. Bowels is fine. Okay?
I love the music.
Music's good.
I mean, I was thinking they'll say it's wall to wall, but I don't care. I think it's making such a difference.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. Feel good.
Okay. No, I feel fine.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
You know, I'm having a party tonight at my place, and bring your girl. Come on over. We'll have some fun.
Well, I'll tell you, I want to prepare for the footsteps and get a good night's sleep. And also, we broke up and we just got back together, and maybe we want to be alone.
I'll come to the party.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that is every relationship you have as an editor. In fact, sometimes you work with some really collaborative people that, you know, want to go down those paths of mystery. So let's get to some technical stuff. When should post-production start? Pre-production. What does that mean? What that means is, based on the script and conversations and storyboards, you're going to have to figure out some of these logistical issues before they actually go out and shoot. The first is, are there going to be VFX shots? And if so, how are they shooting them? How are you getting them? And how are you dealing with them? Do you need to have an on-set VFX coordinator? And as an editor, oftentimes there's this issue with production, which is delaying the decision. So if you're, as the editor of a project, if you're not on top of this is assuming that they've actually hired an editor before they started shooting. That's also very dubious nowadays. But a VFX coordinator, or maybe you can recreate them with After Effects or some other compositing software. But in order to plan it out, you need to have conversations about this. And if the conversations don't happen before, they may make a decision to shoot with anamorphic lenses, and then you're stuck trying to replicate something that is more difficult than it needed to be. Production audio requests. This is also a painful thing when there's a scene with music in it, and so they decide to play music over the top while there's dialogue occurring, or sometimes you need specific source cues, or even if there's like a phone conversation, you say, hey, could you get that so we can put something in? And all of these things we're going over, it's actually, all you're really trying to do is to recreate the intent that was set up from the beginning. If you or the director have to re-record or record voiceover instead of having the actual actor do it, then you already have to suspend your disbelief a little further. And that's just one example that I'm talking about. And the goal is to limit that and to try to recreate the intent as close as possible. For, you know, everyone here is a filmmaker, so everyone here has seen rough cuts, kind of, you know, incomplete audio, not final mixes. But when you go out and screen your stuff for people, they're not as open to that. And so it's important to put forth the effort before production to get the things to help with that process. In terms of media management, especially nowadays, you will oftentimes not only be the editor, but you will also be the lab. You'll get the dailies, and you'll transcode them, and you'll apply LUTs, and you will have to media manage and back up the stuff that you shot. In terms of the logistics of that, so a tendency on set is to, maybe not as much now as it used to be, but a tendency is to not include the editorial in that process. At lunchtime, for example, you should have someone bring the cards to the editor or the drives that you're backing up on. Then post-production will be closer to production, and notes can be made, and it'll just be a smoother process if you can catch issues in production by looking at the footage. You guys probably didn't know that. In terms of, you think aspect ratio would be something very simple, but even at some of the highest levels of production, no one is talking about these things. The editor is where the rubber meets the road. You should ask that question. Nowadays, not everything shoots the same, not everything shot the same aspect ratio forever. So, for example, this is a common thing. A lot of the Sony cameras now shoot they're RAW cameras, they shoot a 1:8:9 aspect ratio, which is like a DCI standard now. And so Sony, being Sony, they saw a DCI standard for 1:8:9, and they have now made their cameras with a raster of 1:8:9. The problem is a lot of people think, oh, we're doing 1:8:5. That means you have to punch in on the image in order to get that aspect ratio. When where do you punch in on that? Do you punch in on that when you transcode, or do you punch in on that after they've transcoded, and every time in your editing system you have to punch in 3% on every single shot? And what does that have to, and how does that affect the finishing of the project? All those questions need to be talked about. Do you guys deal with LUTs here very often? All right, so we're going to get into that. This is also very important. That'll be the next thing that we get into. The general idea with a LUT is, LUT stands for look up table, simple. The main idea behind LUTs is that they're intended to modify the image to be as close to the intended viewing experience as possible. What does that mean in terms of this whole process? Sometimes LUTs are made, I'm looking at this computer monitor here, you guys are looking at this projection, and this has a specific color space, that has a specific color space, and the image quality and representation of this image is different than on that. It's different brightness levels, how it affects me. That's reflected light, this is emitted light. There's all these things that you have to think about. Well, you may not have to, but we'll get into that. But the main idea is some LUTs do the transform that say, hey, I want the image to look like it does here, and I want it to match up there, or at least as close as possible. Those would be a transform LUT. The other kind of LUTs, which are oftentimes meant for production, there are transform LUTs to go from what they're looking on the camera to like the on-set monitor. But also there are LUTs that are communicating the intent of the director and cinematographer in terms of color and contrast and brightness. And what does that mean? That means, well, the goal is that at every stage of the process, everyone is looking at the same image. On set, you're looking on the on-set monitor. That should look like what you're going to be working with when you're cutting the online thing. And more importantly, all of those need to look like what the finished product is intended. Now, you're not going to get it exactly right. And there's some hesitancy oftentimes from cinematographers to provide this. And the main argument for it is, if you're making creative choices at the stage of the offline edit, you want those choices to reflect the actual experience that you're making choices about. And the idea of one of these LUTs is that on set, they watch it and they say, yes, we got it, this is it. When we go to the edit, we want to experience that same, that's it. If not, then what are we cutting? We're cutting some other movie. And it really does come down to experience. Anyway, we're going to go more into LUTs. Any questions about LUTs, by the way, right now? Just basic general questions? We'll keep going. All of these things relate to this idea of workflow. So this is a sample workflow that we use at the Sony Digital Arts Center. The Sony F65 camera is one of the nice digital cinema cameras. It shoots, you can shoot RAW format. We'll talk about RAW format. And So I'm going to use this mouse to kind of point at things. So we're starting here. This is the camera source, and then down here is dual system audio recording, if they have lavs and booms, unattached to the camera. So they're recording separately. Hopefully they jam sync, though, to save you time and energy. So this is the source material. And then in this case, we have our finishing files are an Apple ProRes 4x4, HD cam, and a master tape. So this workflow is intended, this diagram is intended to take you through the different steps that you need to be aware of in this process. Now, so this software right here, NextLab, is a photochem software that's used to take the dailies, both sound and picture, marry them, sync them, and then you'd apply a LUT in there, and then you transcode and create your offline dailies. In this case, we're using AVID, nonlinear editing system. You guys use primarily Final Cut and Premiere. So you may be making .movs instead of MXFs, and instead of ALEs, I don't know what you would get, sorry. I don't know what you would need. You actually don't need an ALE often anymore. You need AAFs and the MXFs. ALEs are complementary metadata files. We'll talk about metadata files too. The main idea is you're going to start with the stuff on the left here. Sony F65. That's going to be the sound I'm neglecting because it is kind of a more simplistic path. There's not, the offline, online process is not intense. In fact, you can just, because sound is much smaller files, you just keep it at the maximum quality throughout the whole process. Now for picture though, David Fincher is able to afford a massive RAID unit that can play back raw footage in real time with multiple nodes of color correction and compositing on it with massive powerful computers to process all of this. But currently, most people cannot do that. So cutting the camera originals is not necessarily a current reasonable pathway for doing a production, which means you have to transcode. That means you're going to go from, in this case, this is a 4K file down to a 1920 by 1080, less than 2K file, resolution-wise. And so at some point, this is our nonlinear editing system, the AVID. That's where you're going to actually spend most of your time doing creative work. Like 95% of your creative work is done there. But when you're done with that, now you have to get back to those other files, those raw files, or the camera originals. Even if they're not raw, you still want to go back to them. You don't want to be working off of these highly compressed HD files. So how do you do that? The idea is that you create a metadata path that you can follow throughout the whole process, which means when I'm talking about metadata, I'm talking about data. And that would be time code, that would be file name, that would be aspect ratio, that would be any sort of information that relates between the offline and the online files. For AVID, the export for that for pictures in AAF or an AVID authoring format, or in EDL, which is an older metadata carrier, more simplistic edit decision list, which comes from the background of film, where people would actually have like a list of key numbers with time code, and they'd be there'd be a list, and they'd literally assemble the film that way. EDL or AAFs are like EDLs on steroids. You could think of them like that, because it's going to carry other metadata that has to deal with creative decisions you did in the edit, like a keyframed resize, or maybe a time warp, or any speed manipulation, any of the editorial nonlinear editing system effects. It's supposed to translate that. Premiere can do both AAFs and XMLs. Final Cut only does XMLs. XMLs are the equivalent of the EDL on steroids, but for Final Cut. So now, where are you going with these files? You're not finishing. You can kind of finish You can finish in all of the nonlinear editing systems. However, the tools used for working in color grading are not as robust as some other tools, which is what the professional path is. In this case, we oftentimes go to the DaVinci Resolve. So this is a color grading platform. It's an application. And these metadata files, this is where there's competition. The AAFs and XMLs, with all their best intentions, do not always translate everything correctly. And it has to deal with how, for example, a keyframed resize math, the math on how it does that resize in AVID is different than the math it does in Resolve. So when you bring that metadata file in, it'll say, oh, hold on, we can't do it like they did. We're going to do it our own way. And then you have to reevaluate that choice you made inside that finishing tool for color grading. For sound, you'll be able to export an AAF, use both AAFs for picture and sound, and that turnover to Soundhouse for sound design is oftentimes more simple and usually less expensive, negotiating the costs of that translation. When this is an area where there's a lot of growth as an editor, for you as an editor. Being able to do an online or conform, which is now available to you through Resolve Lite, you can deliver a professional project to a grading facility with a free program that's very powerful. And being able to translate from AVID, Final Cut, or Premiere, that is a whole process in and of itself. And it's using metadata files and then re-examining how to recreate them in that new system. After you've color graded, it doesn't actually, the metadata no longer matters because you're just going to kick out one master thing, one finish file, or actually a couple if you have other delivery requirements. But in general, you're going to have a finished file. In this case, we're talking about a color graded DPX file. That DPX is a uncompressed file format by definition. Now, that can be of multiple different bit depths. We'll get into bit depths later also. Any questions yet about this diagram that may be confusing that you want to ask a question about? Okay, we'll go to the next one. Yeah, we're looking at this pipeline. You go, oh, great, that looks like a great idea. Let's do that. But then when do you do it? Do you just wait for camera from on-set production to deliver you a card and start this process? The answer to that is no. Instead, what you're going to want to do is there's oftentimes a camera test. The cinematographer will go out and shoot things, and they'll be evaluating the camera, and they'll be evaluating what their image is that they want to create. In that process, they usually create a LUT, which is defining the look or their intended look for the film. So they'll create a look, and they'll have a piece of media that is from the camera that they intend to use for production. This is the time to test the camera pipeline. Why is that important? Well, if you wait for production to occur, one, you currently don't have the LUT. That will be an obstacle. Even if they hand you the LUT, you don't know if it works in the system. No one has looked at it. After it's processed, maybe they have an issue with video levels versus data levels LUT, and no one ever looked at it through the pipeline, so there's a problem there. So you're basically worthless. The LUT's worthless. Another reason why is the metadata path may be destroyed. If you shoot, a GoPro, for example, those are used all the time because they're inexpensive and they do a lot of the things that people want, but they don't have enough metadata to help you go through that process. So oftentimes you have to add metadata to the source camera footage for it to be relinked later. The problem with this is if you don't maintain this metadata path, that means you're going to shoot something, bring it into your editing system, do an export of your AAF or EDL, and bring it into a finishing tool like Resolve. And you want to make sure that it links back to the raw footage based on the metadata that you have in your edit. This is like literally taking like 3 shots, putting them in a timeline, and exporting an AAF, and seeing if it translates to that finishing tool. So if you don't do that, you have just shot yourself in the foot. Because if the metadata path is lost, you will no longer be able to deliver to a finishing house. A professional finishing house would literally reject it. They would say that we can't do this, or they would charge you an arm and a leg, and that is also bad. What does it mean? I kind of went over that. That means you're actually going to take footage from that camera test and run it through the whole pipeline to a color grading tool. When should this be done? So obviously before, but how much before? That actually depends often on what camera they're shooting with. The Sony cameras and the RE camera, those cameras, those are pretty solid. Whenever the camera test can occur, that would be probably acceptable on the most part, because they are actively involved in making the rest of the industry aware of the changes that they do to their cameras, like firmware updates. The exception to this is the Red camera, and even like the Blackmagic cameras, they make the world aware of it. The Red camera, however, or Red, all of their cameras, they are kind of like a secretive cult in that they will make a change, they'll do a firmware update to their camera, and they won't tell anyone, and they want you to use their tools, Red CineX or other tools that they want you to use. And the problem is, like, the NextLab, which is a very robust tool for the post-production world, it won't have any way of dealing with this new firmware update to the footage. So with something like the Red camera, you'd want to do it as close, within a week of production if possible. That way you can test if, this firmware update now can go through my pipeline without being worried that now they've done a firmware update, and on the first day of production you have nothing to show. Yeah. Any questions about that so far? No. Okay. Now let's talk about what kind of media is out there. Oof. I mentioned raw files, and there are raw files, and then there are, I don't want to say compressed files. They are compressed often. I want to say there's raw files and untranslated file, and translated files. And there's different kinds of those. One of them that is notorious, they're known as WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Let's go back. What does that mean? That means, so when we're talking about raw files, what is a raw file? What they mean is there'll be light that enters through the lens, and it'll hit a chip sensor. That chip sensor is recording voltage associated with the photons hitting it. Yeah, photons. That information is then put into I said debayer somewhere in here, debayering, yeah. The chip pattern is known as a Bayer pattern. The voltage associated with the light hitting that chip sensor is then stored as a Bayer file. Or in other cameras, it would just be a raw file, which is an undecoded bunch of data associated with this chip sensor information. And the raw files are saying, hey, let's choose how we're going to process these later. That's an important thing. The WYSIWYG files are saying, okay, we've got this footage. Hey, you know what? I know that you're going to be looking at this on a Rec 709, or, none of these are probably Rec 709, but sRGB or Rec 709 monitor, so I will translate that information to reflect an intended, what you saw in reality, to this monitor. So it is making a choice on how to distribute the data of image data to that platform. I know this is we're getting into it, but I'll stay at as much as I can on just the surface of things. So this data distribution curve has now been chosen at the time of shooting. The raw camera file you choose later, you go, oh, I want to decode it like the same way that film is processed. I want it to have a film curve to it. I want it to have, you know, I'm going to look at it on a computer monitor, so I'm going to decode it to be looked at on a computer monitor. So what does that mean? Let's look at this. So, no. All right, so this is a tool, the DaVinci Resolve. It's Resolve Lite, free program, extremely powerful. And if you're in those classes the next 2 days, we're going to fiddle around in here. The main idea is, let's pretend, for example, that the footage that we're looking at here, so this shot right here is, this piece of media right here is F55 Sony raw footage, right? Let me show you how to identify that in here. So within here, it's telling me, what is this? This is F55 raw SQ, which is a specific kind of raw file. I have made a choice about this file. I said, hey, file, I want you to decode it a certain way. Let's look at how I chose to decode it. Right here, this is a little camera raw based on clip. I'm saying on this clip, I want you to decode it this way. So I said, you know what, I want the white balance to be, this is where I've delayed the decision to post, and I say, this is where I want to make the choice. I want it, the white balance as shot, however I balance the camera at that time. I know I want it to be viewed on a Rec 709 monitor that's calibrated to Gamma 2.4. It looks like this. That actually looks pretty good, actually, right? Like, hey, that's probably pretty close to what it looked like the day of they shot it. Or it may even look a little better, a little more saturated. Looks nice, real nice. This is the same day. This is a different decode setting. If you look at what I have it set up is, we have it as S-gamut 3 cine, gamma S-log 3. You say, Justin, why would you ever want to decode it that way? That looks like dog poop. Why would we want to do that? And I would say, well, this is why. Remember those LUTs we were talking about? The LUTs are the thing that help us here. Because if you look back at this file, we have actually removed information. How do you know that? We're going to look at a waveform. Let's turn them on. Video scopes. Let's do one. Let's look at an RGB parade. Okay, so when you're looking at this, this is separated the red, green, and blue information from that image in the background to each their own graphic representation here. And if you look at the top here, we're losing information. This is blown out. There's no detail in there. And if you were to color grade this, for example, let's just move this around. I'm no colorist, you know. But we're still missing info up there at the top. It's just all blown out. I wonder if there is info there. Let's see. How could we find out if there's info? If you de-Bayer it or decode it in a different way. This right here is the way that the world is moving in terms of how they're going to internally process the footage and the way you probably should. This is why. So in the background there really isn't much information, but what information there is retained. You can see it right here. It's all in there. And it's referencing that raw footage. So you can manipulate this in any way and protect it. Now, in terms of, you don't want to cut with this though. So instead what you do is the cinematographer or the team develops they create a LUT, and this is a generic LUT applied to this. In fact, so let me show you this. So this may require a little more pointing around. So inside here, this is a node graph right here. On this node right here, I've applied a LUT. Let's see what LUT it is. I applied I'm saying, hey, do a transform from slog3 gamut3.cine to cine plus rec 709. And when I did that, it turned that shot from this into this. And you're like, okay, well, why don't we just decode it like this? It's pretty close to this, Justin. And I said, yeah, that's a pretty good point. However, when you're finishing your project and you're going to decode this and do some color grading, there's a benefit to having this LUT where it exists. When I'm modifying this image, a WYSIWYG clip basically does this process and then applies a LUT, or it decodes it to Rec 709. At the end of this, let me explain this node graph a little. The image, this is where the image starts, and then it goes downstream, and this is the output. So the order matters. So if I do something to this, it ripples into this, it ripples into this, and that's how it finishes. Now, if you, like a Canon 5D, it basically will create an image like this, and it looks good. It looks pretty close to how you probably, at some level, intend it to look. But if you were to color grade this and you say, hey, I want to manipulate the black levels down here, you'll see that the information, like, oh, I want it to get a little higher contrast. As I go down, it's just all that information in the dark areas is just disappearing. It's getting crushed, as they say. So what does that matter? Well, if you were to modify, because the reason why it's doing that is all these color grading platforms, even the ones in your nonlinear editing system, they're doing basic math. They're doing additive math, or they're doing subtractive math, or basic multiplication, or basic division. And so it's just doing basic math to those colors. A LUT, however, specifically the 3D LUT that I put on there, we don't have to go down that, but the LUT that you put on there does something else. Instead of doing basic math in this pipeline that I've drawn here, you have created a doing advanced math. It's doing math in relation to the other colors, as opposed to just a simple, I want all of them to go down and all of them to go up. It's saying when this red at this level is here, and this blue is here, and and they have different values for each one of those pixels, it does a transformation to get it to this. What does that do when you're color grading? So let's select this node and modify it. Instead of, I'm going to do the exact same thing. And if you look at the bottom here, you'll notice something different happening. It's doing, you can call it calculus, I guess. It's bending that information. It's not crushing it. So the information still exists for you to work with. And you can create some more dynamic looks that way, and the math you're doing on it cannot really be recreated using just the knobs and stuff that the color grading platform provides. A lot of old school colorists do not like LUTs, and you can kind of see why. And there's a pushback on that, but there is a great benefit to using LUTs. And I'm not saying it's the only way to go, but if you're trying to get across an intent and time matters to you, this can save you time, and it is more directly translating the intent of the cinematographer. So everyone should be using this if that is your goal. Any questions about that? Okay. Let's see where I am on my other stuff here. Okay, so we've touched on what the RAW camera does and how LUTs relate to RAW camera. You can use LUTs in other areas also. The WYSIWYG clips, for example, that's a little, that almost seems bad, right? That, oh, you don't have this flexibility when you're doing your color grade. What is going on then? What do you want to do? You never want to shoot with WYSIWYG. You know what? That's not true. Another camera shoots, and instead of shooting a RAW format with the RE cameras, you can also shoot an Apple ProRes. That Apple ProRes looks like this on the left. So that shot on the left, which looks very similar to that log cine 3 gamut 3 that I debayered earlier in the Sony camera. And what happened is, let me just finish this thought and then we'll get into that. So it's basically creating a data distribution curve that matches the decode settings that we just showed you for the I'm showing you in the reverse order because Ari actually figured this out before the other cameras. And they came up with doing this stuff. They didn't figure it out, but they made it accessible and understandable. And after they did this and everyone's like, this is the way to do it, this works really good. And now all of a sudden, you know, Sony has 5 different ways of decoding to a log data distribution curve. Ari already gave you that. The benefit of doing like a compressed file format like Apple Pro is 4x4, you can still shoot 2K. It has a high data rate, and it's not very big. When you're dealing with, you know, the same amount of footage for a raw file, I mean, it all comes down to, at some point, you know, time and money, and you'd have to buy more drives, and that seems simple, but it not only more drives, but how are you going to play back that footage? How are you going to work with that footage? It becomes cumbersome. That raw footage does become cumbersome. So this is an in-camera processed log file, log C they call it. And then you can apply a LUT just like we did with the F65. I've got that up also. Let me hold on right here. Yeah. So this is the file without a LUT on it, and then when you put the LUT on it, it looks much nicer. Same shot, so you get to see the benefit of that. It's a 2K file, so it's, you know, that's very good. It's very, I don't know, 99% of the time you're going to be screening this stuff, no one can tell the difference even between, you know, HD is going to look almost the exact same as even 4K on a projector this big. You'd have to get up like this close on a still image and go, that's a pixel. I mean, it's very difficult. Even when you get to the 4K, it's hard to notice that. And on a moving image, it's almost impossible. So the resolution thing that's happening is somewhat a function of other factors because HD and 2K are actually very good. So, you know, in terms of managing money and time and cumbersome footage, this might be a very good path for you to go down. Yeah. Get to the next slide here. Okay, so let's talk about something else. I'm using the term data distribution curve, and I'm using the term log C, and I'm using color space, I'm using math and all that stuff. It's all boiling down to this simple idea that our eyes do not see the same way as a chip sensor. A chip sensor is going to see things, you know, if one photon hits a chip sensor, we will see that photon. My eye sees it, chip sensor sees it. 2 photons hit it, my eye sees it double, the chip sensor sees it double. When 3 photons hit it, my eye does not detect. That is not, we see light logarithmically. We can see better in the shadows. So the end result of that is the camera is seeing something in a linear fashion. And we're talking about this data distribution curve. The idea behind that is there is lots of information at the bottom that we are sensitive to that the camera is not giving emphasis towards. And to offset that, they have created this adjustment for you to do in order to maximize that information. And it's about, you know, I'm making it very simple, talking about 1 photon, 2 photons. But so for our eyes to see a noticeable difference or a stop of light from one to another, it has to double the quantity of light. That isn't really a problem at the low end, right? But then when you get in the upper end where it goes from 1,000 to 2,000, that's a lot more photon data storage on that chip sensor. So how do you protect yourself? You put it through this data distribution curve, and that's how you can maintain important information from your chip sensor that you can then use later, that you can color grade and is more attractive to our eyes, so to speak. Any questions about that? I glossed over a lot there, so I get that. It's still hard to think about how that works, but yeah, I'll go to the next thing. Any questions on that I probably can't answer? Okay, next. Let's move on towards the creative part. I know that if I've talked about Merch before, and he is also all about process. And one of the first things that he talks about in his creative process, and like I said earlier, you can go through your own process. Just to be aware of it is the important thing, and that's going to affect your outcome, and you can modify your process and see the difference. One of the things that I do find very valuable, which he talks about in the blink of an eye, is a chapter called The Decisive Moment. If you've ever had to sit and watch dailies, you will immediately begin to not pay attention. After 3 shots, you go, I don't want to do this anymore. How many times do you need to see a guy walk through a door and shake someone's hand? If they did 20 takes, are you going to watch all 20 takes? The answer is yes. Sadly, you are. Now, what are you going to get out of that? And when does your editorial creative process start? It starts right there. It starts from watching the dailies. And the point of the decisive moment is, with every take, you want to find the moment in that take that is representative of the emotional or story impact of that shot. It'll provide a lot of things to you. So the decisive moment is finding in every shot that moment. It'll make you pay attention. And you'll be like, oh, that's it. And more often than not, when you find that moment, it somehow ends up in the film. That's the point he makes. He says a large percentage of his decisive moments end up in the film at a certain cut point even. So I do find that very valuable. Another part of this is you found that moment. It's pretty bleak in editing room often. It's like a cave often. They want to be able to recreate a theatrical experience, so it's dark. There's no windows often. And one of the things you want to do is you find these moments, right? The idea is that you then print them out and have a visual image outside of a computer that you can then put on the wall and organize. However you organize that can actually lead to new ideas. I never thought of that shot next to that shot. This is interesting. And it not only does that, but it also creates an atmosphere in your editing room where you come in and people go, that's serious. This guy's into it. And you can quickly reference, oh yeah, remember that scene, that moment? We need to go from there to this part. And it's more intuitive process when you're working with someone to be able to point at someone and say that to there, yes, no, So that's the other part of it that's nice. Now, in basically every single NLE program, nonlinear editing program, there is a way to view the file in that capacity where you're looking at the clips and you can hit play and you stop on the frame. That's nice, and oftentimes you don't have the luxury of printing out 100 photographs to put up in your editing bay. It's just ideally that would be there. Otherwise, you should do this with your frames, at least the frame view of all those nonlinear editing systems. Here's another part of the process which you have to have flexibility on, and that is how you're going to get notes. You're going to get script supervisor notes. You're going to get director notes. Cinematographer is going to give you notes. Everyone's going to give you notes, and producers are going to give you notes. And what do you take with those notes? And oftentimes, another merch thing, he calls it seeing around the edge of the frame, meaning those people from on set are taking into consideration things that have nothing to do with the experience of watching the shot. The producer might say, hey, I spent a lot of money on that jib arm. I better see that jib arm in the final product. That really is not how you make a movie, or you should. I spent money on it, so therefore it should be in the movie. So how do you take that in, and how do you want to basically avoid those things, but at the same time, there's another part that's happening, which is editors are rarely the person in charge. We're not the person making executive decisions. In fact, I would say like 99% of the time, we are not. We are at the service of the film, And intent is the thing that we are trying to discover with people. And so that does mean you do have to consider what other people think. Oftentimes that's going to be a director. You guys work on short films or feature films, and the person in the room with you has an intent. Now, you are not mind melded with this person, but at some level, you need to at least show him what they want, what she or he wants from that image, or from that experience. You need to try it, because that's what the intent is. And if you don't, they'll either be unsatisfied with you and you'll be fired, or you'll just be wasting time, because they need to see it fail or see it succeed. Maybe you didn't see it or you didn't understand it. So you do need to work collaboratively with someone, but you also have to be aware that people bring things from production into the editing room which are unimportant. And that includes even the director sometimes is like, hates an actor and doesn't want to see them on screen. That's no reason to not try that out. You should, because oftentimes some of the most obnoxious people on set somehow make it interesting to watch them when you cut it together and make them less obnoxious. Having a blank slate, tabula rasa, is really not a option. Working collaboratively with someone, you need to be aware of intent at some level, and sometimes you don't have that communication with the director or who's ever in the room with you. Now, in terms of doing your first cut, let's start with that. Editors have to care about the process more than almost anyone else. Because your first cut is going to have things in there which you hate. It should. It should have things in there which, when you screen it, make you cringe. But that doesn't mean you just put up the stuff you hate in the worst way possible. You have to try doing what was intended with that footage and let it fail with best efforts. That way, the process can continue forward. If you go, you know what, I know these 5 scenes stink. I cut them out for my first cut. You'll, 1, probably get fired. But 2, now you're going to have to start over. The director says, hey, where were those 5 scenes? Those worked great. I was there. The performances were on. And the problem is now he hasn't experienced it in front of a group of other people to say, hey, those scenes stink. They need to go through that process with you, so you need to present that to them. So your first cut is not the editor's cut. They'll call it the editor's cut, but all that means is secretly that it is everything they shot. If you can, the goal is to use everything they shot as intended, and I'm pretty sure if they shot it, they intended it to be in the film. So that's one idea. Now, the other part is every time you do a screening, screenings are very valuable, and preparing for them and getting something out of them is not always simple. And oftentimes people are say, like, you know what, this movie's too long, cut it down. Or they'll give you notes that are very prescriptive, but they don't actually know intent. They don't know what your intent is. Maybe you want it to feel that way. And in these screenings, people have, when you screen for someone, you're saying, hey, what do you think? Tell me what you think. They're looking for things that bother them. Now, you still have to receive those notes. You should probably write down every note given to you, and then you can evaluate it later and see, they may say, hey, this is too long, and it really it has nothing to do with the length. When people talk about pace, that is a way of saying, I have nothing specific to tell you. I don't like it, and I don't know why. And they may say it's too long or too short or too slow or too fast. And sometimes you have to be kind of a detective to get to the root of why they're feeling that way. And being able to ask questions to the people you screen, that's very important. The other thing about screening for people is there's viewing fatigue. You've been sitting in a room, possibly for a month, looking at the same stuff over and over again. And the hardest thing to do is to bring a openness to every time you see that scene again. And viewing fatigue is in a way, it's inevitable that you do feel it, and like you'll be screening something and you don't really care. But the second you put people in a room and you care about what they're experiencing, it makes you experience your own film in a different way. It's like you've been, looking at the front of a building for a month, and then you do the screening and it's like they just put you on the side of it and you're like, oh my, look at that. That is horrible. And you'll see it in a new way. So screenings can be very valuable, and they can provide a refresher to that viewing fatigue that occurs. Now, I told you I'm not going to dictate any processes to you or any of that, but Murch and other people, editors that have written books about editing, Edward Dmytryk has rules. He also has 6 of them, apparently. And Murch went so far as to actually give percentage weight. He's kind of a different guy like that. He ordered them from emotion, 1 being emotion. We'll talk about what does that mean, 1 to 6. And I didn't put the last 2 percentages. I'm going to have to do some quick math. But I think it's like 3%, 2%. The idea is, honestly, I never work this way. I never sit there and go, we're hitting the story pretty good, but the emotion is, I don't think this way, but in a way, this is a very practical way of thinking, as like, in the end, you've made a choice and you look back on it and you go, oh, that was for an emotional reason. Oh, that was for a story. We needed that moment to emotionally move forward with that character. Oh, that's obviously a rhythm thing. 2 people are confronting, it became like a confrontation, it built, like you can reflect upon it and see that is what you made as a choice in that moment. It's not always as easy to say, well, I'm making this choice for this moment. But, Dmytryk, his is a little more vague, and I would even say antiquated. Like the leave it long on an undecided cut point. I think some of that actually relates to the fact that it's easier to deal with it when you're cutting hard film, which no one does anymore. Things like that are somewhat antiquated, but the idea is that these editors are thinking about what is the value of this. They're evaluating every moment at some point. They're saying, why is this in here? Why are we cutting now? Things like that. Is the next one what I think it is? I think it is. Hold on. Okay, I'll go back to it. So, we're going to talk about the clip that we're about to watch in relation to Murch's rules. And let me just preface it this way. I was a math student, graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Math, and I didn't know, I worked a lot of bad jobs, and I was like, whatever you've all been there. But I was introduced to a few films that made me go, that was interesting. That changed how I thought about film. And I'll talk about the clip I'm about to show, but when I saw this clip, I go, this is different. It was different than other movies I'd ever seen. How many people here have seen Breaking the Waves? We got 2. So we're going to watch Breaking the Waves. This may seem more tame now, but when it came out, people didn't work like this. People didn't cut like this. How many people here know Lars von Trier? More people. So this is the movie I would say that was kind of like, it won Cannes Film Festival Awards. It was like a big success. So personally, this movie affected how I started. I was like, I'm a math guy. What is this? And anyway, when I saw it, I was like, this is interesting. And it really made me say, I was into film. I liked watching films. And this gave me a way of saying, I get this. I get what he's doing. And it felt exciting. I'm going to show it to you because it may excite you. Or you may hate it. So let's watch it.
His name is Jan.
I do not know him.
is from the rig.
You know we do not favor matrimony with outsiders.
Can you even tell us what matrimony is?
It's when two people are joined in God.
Do you really believe you're capable of bearing the responsibility not only for your own marriage and God, but also on others?
I know I am.
Can you think of anything of real value that the outsiders have brought with them?
Their music.
Out you go, Bess McNeil, and be seated.
Forgot my six-string razor. Hit the sky. Halfway to Memphis before I realized. Well, I rang the information. My ex was cold. They said she rides a train to Oreo. Now it's a
Grace. Oh, look, Mr. Big. It's late. All right, but at least he's come in. Get this. You're going to ruin your dress. He's late. You're being silly. Come on. I've had enough. Come on. Let's get your coat. Come on, don't ruin it. It's a good day. Come on. You're not supposed to sit in the building.
break out the bottle.
Will you please be upstanding for the bride? As we stand in thy presence today, in thy house, we worship thee as the author of every good and perfect gift. Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. We should love Christ and give ourselves to him. If it is not too inappropriate, may I say that you, Bess, have shown that love and that commitment in your own life. It is not once or twice that you have been in this building giving your time and effort to cleaning it. I know that you have done that not so as to be well thought of here on earth, but out of your love for God in heaven.
Great sermon, Father. Ring the bells, then.
Our church has no bells.
Not too fun, is it?
Oh, the sister-in-law. We haven't really met, have we?
No. But everything happened so quickly.
What makes you say that?
I just mean, well, it did, didn't it?
But you're not happy for me.
Of course I am. Of course I am. Dear Bess, I've known you for 6 years, and I can definitely say you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. It wasn't easy for me here when I married Sam, but you welcomed me instantly, and I won't ever forget that. Your generosity knows no bounds, like the time when you lent Jack a bike because his was broken, only it was mine and I had to walk to work. I was furious with you then, but I regret that now, because it's your spirit. You'd give anything to anyone. When Sam died, I lost a husband, and you were... We saw each other through that and promised to look after one another. You are the reason... Sorry. You are the reason I have stayed when I almost gave up in this cold place. And now your warmth has embraced another outsider. His name is Jan, and I don't know much about him, but I'll accept his right to be here. Because of you, Bess. If he doesn't take care of you and give you everything you need, I'll kill him. Thank you for all you've given me, Bess. I love you very much.
I'll just say this also about this. About 2/3 that it gets, if this is uncomfortable often, but interesting, and about 2/3 of the way in, it gets real uncomfortable. Those who have seen it know what I'm talking about. Here's another thing. So oftentimes as editors, we're constantly using reason to solve problems. We don't see something, we want A through Z to be taken care of. And one of the problems of being an editor is that you do have to switch between experiencing something and then using reason to solve the problem. And the thing that oftentimes I experience is that I'm very focused on the problem and not an experience of viewing. And there's a very good essay written by Susan Sontag called Against Interpretation, and all of you are art people, so you should read it. It's very important. And she starts off the essay from a quote from Oscar Wilde. "It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. The mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible." She goes into talking about how, this is just the one excerpt, about how interpretation takes that sensory experience of the work of art for granted, and you miss out on that mystery. So one of the last things I like to talk about in terms of the creative process is to always be open to an experience that you're like, I don't want to, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work is not what she's talking about, because it isn't about working. Just as an example, I bet someone here they like a movie, they see value in it, even though they know it is has a lot of critical, the critical viewers and, they don't like it. One of the things I would say is I am not necessarily a fan of Christopher Nolan's films necessarily, but and I went in with pretty low expectations because of what everyone was saying about Interstellar. This is just a side note almost. And after I walked out of it, I would say, regardless of whatever interpretation or other things, I found value in that experience. And even if there are reason holes or whatever, people had problems with it, and there were even some basic story things that I thought, oh man, that he failed there. Overall, I can appreciate that experience, and he achieved that through a process that was open and was not consumed by reason. The other thing is because we're all filmmakers, we want to know how other people do things. We want to know, how did that filmmaker do that? How did he affect me? It's just a two-dimensional thing with light bouncing off of it. How is that magic trick affecting me? And as filmmakers, we're always, in a way, I do value interpretation. I do, if the experience of watching a film resonates within me, I do, as a fellow magician, I want to know how they did that trick. And so that's how I use interpretation. I do get in there and I want to say, hey, how did he do that? And you can work it that way also. That's my excuse for interpreting films. Yeah. now we can kind of talk about where does the editor live in this whole process? For example, you know, I talked earlier about who's making those creative decisions. Each one of these, like, you know, if you work at Pixar or if you work in like on a television series or if you're an independent film, like, what is your relationship to creative decisions? Are you the one making them? You know, oftentimes, you know, in documentaries or in reality TV or reality shows, however you want to put it, the editor does exert more influence than in other forms of film or video. And but in all of them, the underlying idea is that you are a facilitator of ideas, and that is really what it is, because you are not, very rarely is the editor just left alone in a room and saying, hey, can you just hand me when you're done, just hand it over to me? In fact, I don't even know if that's ever happened. At some level, you're the facilitator of new experiences and ideas and kind of a shepherd in that way. And regardless of what any of these are, that's where your voice is to be questioning and to be standing up for things that you feel were valuable. And really, at some level, that is all anyone could ever be as an editor. You are essentially hired for your taste. That, in many ways, that's true, that you're going to be in a room making creative decisions and working on problems and brainstorming ideas with someone. And if you guys have totally two different concepts of what value is within a shot or a montage or, you know, how something should sound or look, then you probably aren't going to have a long-lasting relationship, and you probably are not meant to work with that person creatively. So you do want to be a facilitator of those things, but you also need to stand up for what you think is important. And as you saw in the the first video I showed, Modern Romance, the editor is oftentimes, you know, he's the second fiddle to the leader. In this case, that was the director. So I have one more clip from Modern Romance. It's the soundstage where they're going to do some work. And this is, I think, where the virtue of the editor lives.
What do you think?
I think what you got is fine.
No, I know, but the director hates it, so what can we do?
What do you want to do?
Well, I want to get some kind of pounding, some kind of noise when he's coming through that corridor, like he's running hard and heavy. Pounding, I guess, is what I want. Pounding. Do you have any stock stuff that's good? Why don't you try to put in the Hulk?
Yeah, we should hear that. That could work.
Let's try the Hulk.
The Hulk's too slow.
Well, we have Hulk running, don't we? Hulk running. Let's try that.
Even running is too slow.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's try it. Maybe we'll get lucky, okay?
Put up the Incredible Hulk on effects number 3.
What do you want, Buzz? Standard Hulk?
No, Hulk running.
Oh, no.
Take a few minutes. I don't think he's going to find it.
Oh, I bet he does. He always seems to eventually. We got a break now?
No.
Okay, I'm going to go to my car, right? I'll be back.
Want a cup of coffee?
Please. What time is it?
About 4:30.
Fidelity Savings.
Mary Harvard, please.
Oh, Mary, telephone. Ooh, that's some dress. You look beautiful.
Thank you. Hello?
He likes those dresses, huh? I'm telling you.
I'm real busy. Can I call you right back?
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just checking about dinner. I'm thinking maybe we'll go downtown and eat Italian. What do you think?
Well, when?
When? What do you mean, tonight?
Robert, look, can I call you back?
What's wrong?
Listen, I may have to work tonight.
Why? What kind of work?
Well, Jim's going to take these clients out to dinner, and he asked if I'd come along.
You can't come along. I mean, we have this plan.
We didn't make any definite plans.
Well,
Look, this just came up now, and it's not even for sure.
Let me call you back, okay?
Well, all right. I'll tell you what, though. I'm still counting on it.
I'll call you back.
All right. You know the number here? Hello? How would I call long distance here?
Dial 51.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Who's this?
What was this?
Well, I'm calling a doctor. Dr. Harmon, please.
Doctor? No, babe. I ski.
Not there?
No.
Is he in later?
No, he doesn't live here, okay?
Well, all right, I've got a mistake. I'm calling a doctor.
Okay, you want to hear these hoax now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Let's hear what this sounds like.
All right.
I think it's a waste of time.
Good. We'll see it.
Okay, let's go.
Hold it.
Projector?
What is that?
I told you, it's too slow.
Too slow. Forget that. The guy's screaming.
Didn't say that. It said Hulk running.
Well, write in Hulk screaming. That's the effect.
Sorry.
Okay. We're going to have to do this ourselves, all right? I'll have to foliate. So what kind of surface can you give me to run on?
What do you want?
Well, what do you have?
Here?
Yeah.
Linoleum, gravel, or concrete? If you want anything else, it'll take a day.
No. Now, what do you think? What do you think that surface looks like to you, that hallway?
Carpet.
It is. I'm just saying it more in terms of what, in the reality of the motion picture, it looks like. What do you think? It's a spaceship. What kind of surface might he be running on?
I don't know. Space floor?
Okay.
Fine. Look, why don't we just use the concrete, okay?
Would
It'll work.
you set up the concrete for us, please?
Concrete's pretty heavy for a spaceship, isn't it?
This is a real special ship. Would you just set it up? Okay, now, I have to carry something to simulate that,
To communicate.
Okay. How much do you think that thing weighs?
Maybe about 100 pounds.
That could be a little heavy.
Okay, what about 50 pounds?
What do you think?
What do I think of what?
The thing that George Kennedy's carrying there, the communicator. How much do you think that weighs?
Maybe it doesn't weigh anything. Did you ever think of that? Maybe it's up on one of those planets that has no gravity.
Funny. Could we please just do this ourselves, all right?
Look, this could be good. Look.
The water bottle.
Yes.
Great.
This is good. All right? Okay, now, I gotta run.
We'll go around the table.
Okay, good. Okay, all right. So, gotta get out of breath. He's running down this ship, okay?
One flight, good. One
Okay,
flight.
good. All right, here we go.
One flight.
Okay, that's level 1. Okay, running. Chase me. Chase me. Come on, chase me. Chase me.
Coffee.
Chase me. Chase me. Oh, damn it, chase me. Oh, Jesus, here we go. Okay, don't chase me now. I'm getting away from you. I'm going down the hall. Look, I've escaped. I've escaped. Here I come. I've escaped. I'm escaped. I'm gonna go. Go. That looked good. That's good. That's
great.
good.
Okay,
Let's see
wind
that
it
back. Let's
Okay,
see that back.
Take a look at it.
Give us a little bit of echo and some low end. All right.
Fantastic. It works.
I think so. What do you think?
I think you saved the picture.
Okay, we're through. That's it.
It's a wrap.
Okay.
We got Heaven's Gate short version here at 8.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess the point I was trying to make is that despite all the assistance he was receiving, and even though he himself did not find it necessary, he facilitated that and got it done. Anyway, that's the end.
If anyone's got any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
My question would be, is more of like a hardware question as far as what kind of computers you guys use. Do you find yourself using more like Macintosh, or do you build your own PCs, or like what kind of like hardware are you working with?
So in general, okay, how do I put it this way? So a lot of facilities that I work at, most of them run on Macs. Most of them do. This new trash can Mac that came out is kind of a wrinkle in the system, because there was the old Mac towers you could manipulate to get expansion chassis, additional graphics cards, ways to connect to RAID units, fiber connections, you could customize even those Macs. These new ones, not so much. They're very powerful and everything. And I think the reason why the facilities I work at usually are Mac-based deal mostly with Macs. Well, part of it is I think the intrusion 10 plus years ago of Final Cut. When Final Cut came in, it became a more infrastructure-friendly purchase for different buildings, in that they could buy a piece of software for less than you would pay for an AVID. You wouldn't have to buy any of the AVID hardware, which was literally like $20,000 or $30,000. So for a facility to be able to cut on something that wasn't AVID was very appealing, because they're saving tons of money. So they would invest in all these Macs, and AVID worked on Mac, so you could even use that too. So in general, I use Macs. This is the reason why I use Macs. You actually end up using, if you're working a lot, you'll end up using that, and you'll use PC, and you'll use, even for some more other things like Linux operating systems, like Ubuntu. The reason why I use Mac mostly is I don't know if it's me, but I feel like I have failures with PCs when I'm working with them. If I'm in the middle of a deadline, they seem to always get me at the worst time. And I have less chronic issues with Mac. And when there's deadlines, even though you're like spending twice as much to get less performance, they are safer. And you are dealing, the other thing is, I mentioned Apple ProRes. Everyone wants those files. And you have to go through some hoops to use PCs and deal with that. In general, it seems like everyone lives in Apple ProRes now. So I think that's the reason why I do. The rest of the world makes me, partly, yeah. Even though Final Cut is kind of disappearing.
Hey, so on Breaking the Waves, like the editing style, the way it was cut, generally when they bring the picture to you, do they have that kind of creative input from the jump start, saying, hey, this is how I want this film cut? Or is that at some point the editor, either through necessity or whatever?
So I recently watched the Criterion came out with a Blu-ray of this, and they talked about all the processes that they did for that film. I think that, in a way, that's a very special thing that happened, in that Lars von Trier came from this group of filmmakers, the Dogma 95 movement, and they had signed kind of like a vow of chastity. I think they called it a vow of chastity, where they would limit themselves in production. No, obviously they didn't follow it here. Like, one of the rules is you cannot have music added afterwards. You have to go into a location that happens to have a radio playing, and that is the only kind of music you can use. And like, they had rules like that. They were trying to pull away from the Iron Man 3s of the world. At the time, it was something else. Who knows? Whatever Michael Bay was making at that time, I don't know. But it was like a way of purifying the filmmaking process. So when he was talking and went through this process, they made a lot of decisions that in a way seem very esoteric when he just talks about them. But I think they come from that feeling that they have a way of approaching it that they don't want to follow strict narrative conventions. I would argue that he's following Murch's rule, though. It's emotional-based cutting, which is 51%. It happens to override everything else. And in the Criterion Collection, he talked about the intent in that is to always, in a way, never let the energy die, I think is like the words he used. Never let it die. So if there was ever a moment that it would die, it had nothing to do with, 180-degree rule, ellipses in time, rhythm, had nothing to do with that. It had entirely to do with the emotional energy of the moment. That's kind of a subjective thing to call out. So, that's, I think, how he came about that process. I think working in Dogma, that's kind of, if you watch the other Dogma films, they don't follow like a strict narrative form, and that was already happening for them. But that was like, their attempt at narrative storytelling, not following all the Dogma rules, but having an essence of Dogma in their process. Dogma 95.
All right. I have a question. Since you're an AVID instructor, that's been like the norm for the past 30 years.
Yes.
Out in the West Coast. What are your thoughts on Premiere coming in through the woodwork with Gone Girl, stuff like that? What are your thoughts moving forward into the future of nonlinear editors?
So, two good things about Premiere. They are on top of what is happening now. AVID, so let me talk about AVID, then we'll talk about Premiere. So AVID has been like the industry standard and is built into all the infrastructures of basically all of the television post facilities. And the reason why is they have an extensive infrastructure system built. They have ISIS chassis that are built to, allow multiple, 20 people to work on the same footage. It's backwards compatible. They have already spent the money on all the gear. They can continue working with that version of the software. So AVID is catering towards that industry. And that's where in the past people would buy their boxes. You'd have to buy their boxes to lay back to tape. They were a tape world nonlinear editing system. And I'll tell you some other bad things about AVID. They wanted you to buy those boxes. Those were $30,000. So plus, they still have them. However, they're kind of obsolete now. Everything can be done on, one of these. You can cut anything with a AVID on this. You don't even need the box. You can lay back to tape from this. Not really, but you can do a lot with very little hardware purchasing, and especially you don't have to buy any of their stuff. And they kept fighting this non-tape based workflow to a point where if you tried to kick out a QuickTime file out of AVID, you are going to have major color shifts. Now, even now, if I were to export a file out of AVID and I say, hey, kick out an Apple ProRes file, who knows what you're going to get. There's always going to be a shift, and there's some tricks now that I've figured out how to get a good file out of AVID as a .mov, but It isn't simple, and they made it hard on purpose, and now they're paying for it because everyone is like, this stinks. I don't want to. Not only that, up until this newest version of AVID, version 8, you couldn't export anything other than 1920 by 1080. So that means you have to then use another system to finish, no matter what. For all those cameras we were talking about earlier, they're all shooting above HD. So if you want to refer back to that camera original material and have an output that's in something other than HD, you had to go to another tool. They also sold an online system called the DS, which also stunk. It was horrible. It was one of the worst online systems. Anyway, when we had that at AFI up until like 2 years ago, it was horrible. So AVID is this juggernaut. If you look at the file, like the actual application on your computer, it is like 5 times as large as Final Cut or Premiere, and you're like, why is this so big? It's because it has these palimpsests from the past attached to it that it's still functioning for, because there's antiquated systems that it still supports. So that's my negative stuff about AVID. The good stuff about AVID is that I'm good at it now because I've had to use it, and I feel most comfortable in it, and I feel, and that's the way, once you start working with AVID and you've had a partial lobotomy and you start working that way, it's hard to go back because you feel a certain way. Like the way you interact with the timeline is different, like the rigid timeline of AVID versus the flexible timelines of all the other nonlinear editing systems. So, I mean, if someone says, Justin, what would you want to cut on? I would say AVID, regardless of all the other obstacles, because now I've spent time overcoming those obstacles. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. But it is definitely difficult. What about Premiere? Premiere, I never took a class on Premiere or After Effects or Photoshop, and I can use all of them. And not only that, Premiere accesses more fully the full power of the computer. AVID is basically like stuck in the 90s. Their titling tool was written, like the code for that I think was written in the 90s, and no one ever uses this other thing called Marquee. Anyway, we don't have to rag on AVID anymore. It's just not forward thinking, and it's catering to an industry that does have major influence. So, Premiere. The good thing about Premiere is that you could, like Fincher, you could work off of camera original footage, cutting it, real-time playback if you have other infrastructure purchases in line. So it's great in that way. And also, I just showed you that pipeline thing. All of a sudden, your pipeline is gone. It is what it is. You can export uncompressed 4K DPX files, 16-bit, if you want. You could finish your film. You could export for delivery straight from there and give it to them, and there would be no translation errors because all the effects you've already done are built into the file that you're exporting. That is very attractive. And also, like I said, Premiere, you could pick it up and just use it. I want this clip to go there. Done. It worked. So, I mean, I'm not very fast by comparison with AVID. I'm much faster with AVID. But Premiere, if I were to have reset my brain, I would absolutely go Premiere 100%. We all know about Final Cut. We don't even talk about it. It's out currently until they do something. What's that? Oh no, yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, Apple is going to make it so you can't even run there. You won't be able to run Final Cut on there. 7. They'll make you get to Final Cut 10. They will update their hardware and outdate the software. Make it so, yeah, you got to learn something else. Or 10.
What else?
So, something that students run into a lot, or what we see in class a lot, is there were mistakes made in the shooting of their films or their work, and they allow those mistakes to show up in their final edits, out of focus shots, etc. Any advice on how they can avoid that, aside from shooting it correctly the first time?
So, mistakes. Basically, editors would be unemployed if there weren't mistakes. So there's mistakes in everything. I mean, very few filmmakers, sans Alfred Hitchcock, make mistakes. And them ending it, when you say final, do you mean the cut they're screening for you at that time? Or the cut they're like, I'm done? The I'm done cut? The I'm done cut means that they gave up. That's what that means. Thank you. That's what that means. If they're letting stuff in there that is so egregious that everyone in the room goes, ouch, then they have given up. If they're like, I'm done, this is great, then they, at some level, feel that.
But I need this shot in here to tell this story.
Mm.
The focus is reversed, I know, but I need it.
Yes. We kind of have a responsibility when we're screening anything or showing anything is two things. One, there's a standard that we have experienced. Every day you watch a MTV music video, you watch a television show, they don't let those things in. And we are not forgiving of those things. We can't control that. We say that is good. Yeah, some of those mistakes that you have at this level, those may have passed 60 years ago, and people are like, hey, what? That's great. Next. They're fine with it. Lens problems, whatever. But now our visual grammar is pretty acute, and we are consumers constantly. We can't stop it, and we will notice those things. And in terms of important for the story, well, if you follow Murch's, what trumps story? Emotion. If you're in the middle of watching something and it is not if the emotion is lost because of that shot, that's his process. You obviously have chosen differently if you've left it in your film. If you experience the same thing and you say, yes, that is absolutely not fulfilling the emotional moment, and you still keep it in there, then you have made a choice to say that is less important than story. And remember what I said about Sontag, experience. So anyway. That's all I got for that. That's it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.